Good morning. Oh, there we go. So, Pastor Richard and I were talking this week about what we want to try to make sure we're doing so we can get through the rest of Mark in a relatively timely fashion, sometimes before 2026. And so our plan was we're going to try to do roughly a chapter or so a week. That's the plan. That said, he left me with a part of last week's chapter for this week, so we'll see if we can set like a land speed record or something like that today. But we're gonna take the time we need to take. So, looking forward to that. So we're starting with Mark 7:31 today. So Mark 7:31, and then we're gonna try. I think we can do it. I think we can get through chapter 8. We'll see. I've mistakenly been optimistic on that front before, but that's okay. But before we do that, let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus, we thank you that you have come to be that man of action, that you have shown your power over the brokenness of this world. We pray that you would turn our hearts to you as we gather around your word today, that you would feed us, that your spirit would strengthen us to be your people connected to you for life. In your name, amen. Okay, so we're now kind of midway through this stretch as we're going through Mark's gospel, looking at ways that Jesus is at work in connecting, and particularly connecting with outsiders, connecting with Gentiles. So we're going to see some of that happening here too, which is a different thing. We've said before that Mark's gospel is a gospel of conflict, right? Where Jesus is coming is being opposed by various forces in the world, including the religious establishment, and seeing how that all works. So it's kind of a high point for Jesus' popularity too, in terms of the public, and we're going to see kind of what the impact of that is here. So Mark 7:31. So Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee and the region of the Decapolis. Now, the Decapolis, these are these so-called 10 cities that are on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, so Gentile territory. And they brought to Jesus a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment of some kind, and they begin to plead with him that Jesus would place his hand on him. And upon taking the man aside from the crowd, he takes him off by himself. Jesus puts his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touches his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And Jesus charged him to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. All right, so Jesus doing yet another healing, another work that shows that he has this power over the brokenness that we have in the world. So he has this man, and kind of pay attention to what Jesus does here with this man who is mute, has a speech impediment. So the people are begging for Jesus to take action. So what's the first thing Jesus does? He takes him away, takes the man apart. So one, it's not a spectacle, in front of everybody else, but also what's it showing? What does it show Jesus' attitude towards this guy is? He cares. He cares for this man, right? And he's having this kind of like one-on-one time with him, away with him. And so the guy can't hear, right? So what does Jesus use? Sign language, right? Your ears don't work, right? And the spitting out kind of thing. His tongue doesn't work. So Jesus said he kind of carrying with them, and so looking up to heaven. So in prayer, and Jesus says to the guy, Ephphatha, Aramaic, be opened, be open, and it is. So the word that created all things is at work here again to command these ears and this tongue to be open, to work, to function the way that they are designed to. And what happens in response to the word? It happens. It happens, and this is great. So so the word is at work, but right, Jesus tells the people to tell no one. So they tell no one, right? No, they're not. They are not listening, and so they go and they just spread the word. So the more he's telling them don't say anything, they're just like kids on trying to keep a surprise, right? Did you see what he did? And so the word continues to spread, and this citation here going back, Jesus, he even makes the deaf hear, the mute speak. He has this power. So Jesus' popularity continually spreads. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's keep moving here with Mark. And any questions on that with Jesus healing of the? Yeah, Cindy.
Never hearing and never speaking, now he can talk.
Yeah.
Without ever hearing it.
Yeah, there's that restoration too. Yeah.
I'm looking in the margin of my Bible, and Pastor Keith covers this in 9:6 of 15. He called it a wow moment.
Yeah. That is fair. It is a wow moment. And Jana, would you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's tactile, but what else is it too? In each of those different ways. But it's word, but it's personal. Well, it can be the spitting thing, and after spitting, it can be like it doesn't work, kind of thing, like that kind of, as opposed to like spitting and making mud, which he does with the blind man. Yeah. 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 So there's different ways there. So okay, let's move on to chapter 8 here. And so we kind of in Mark's gospel now we're kind of turning. So in chapter 8, we're moving things forward towards the destination. And we have here, this is kind of fun, because what did Jesus already do with some bread and some fish in Mark's gospel? He fed the 5,000, right? And of course, his disciples totally got it from that point on. So let's take a look at Mark chapter 8 here, if you've got in your Bibles. It's the feeding of the 4,000. Spoiler alert. Let's see what happens. So in those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, because the people want to come to hear Jesus, but they also want to come and receive this power that he has and the healing that he's brought. And again, they had nothing to eat. He calls the disciples and says to them, I have compassion on the crowd, like his the kind of the way that Jesus is saying it. And again, this is like one of those Jesus says, like he proceeds to say, he has this heartfelt, like this gut. His gut goes out to the crowd and said, they've been with me now 3 days. 3 sounds important. And they have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint on the way. And some of them come from far away. So Jesus kind of laying it out to the disciples. And then the disciples, they respond back to Jesus. How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? How, Jesus, can one do that? Oh, disciples. And Jesus asks them, how many loaves do you have? 7? How many disciples are there? Yeah, you got the 12, like the close. They've only got 7 loaves of bread, all right? So they've been there for a while. So he directs the crowd to sit down on the ground. He takes the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he breaks them and gives them to his disciples, sets them before the people. They set them before the crowd, and they had a few small fish as well. And having blessed them, Jesus proceeds to take those that those also should be set before the people. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. 7 also sounds like a significant number. Okay. And there were about 4,000 people. And then he dismisses them. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples, went to the district of Dalmanutha. Okay. So Jesus feeding the 4,000 here. So what similarities do you see with the feeding of the 5,000? People are out. Jesus is teaching them. He has compassion. His gut goes out to them. But there at the beginning, Jesus' compassion goes out to the 5,000 plus because they are like sheep without a shepherd. He's there to teach them. Here, his gut goes out to them because they've been with him for these days and now they've run out of food. And like Jesus is like, well, they're not going to be able to make it home without passing out. That's not good. All right. We then have this thing, the disciples responding back to Jesus. Well, how are we going to do that, Jesus? We don't have supplies. Jesus asked them, well, what do you have? We don't know if there was a little boy with the fishes and loaves here, if the disciples, oh, no, they've got some bread, some fish there, and they set that before him. Now, 7, right, if you just think about it in terms of the biblical numerology, 7 is a number of completeness. Okay. We don't necessarily need to read too much into that one here, but okay. And then they've got these 4 fish, that are few small fish there. And so they take that. Jesus gives thanks, breaks it, sends it out before the crowd, and the people eat. And how are the people then after eating? They are satisfied. They've had their fill. Not just that, oh, somebody got a nibble, but they had their fill, and then what? Leftovers, right? I don't know how you feel about leftovers, but these are good leftovers here. So many baskets full. How many baskets full? 7 baskets full. So not just 7 loaves of bread, you now have 7 baskets of the leftovers. And then feeds about the 4,000 people. So not just the men listed here, but about 4,000 people there. So this is the kind of this story. This is like Jesus like ping-ponging back and forth across the Sea of Galilee here. So he immediately gets into the boat with the disciples and heads back across the sea to the this other region, Dalmanutha. So or Magdala is another name for it. So he heads westward back over to there. Okay. Any questions on the feeding of the 4,000? Okay, so Jesus is now back over on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. And then, hey, it's our buddies, the Pharisees. And they come. And the disciples, so the Pharisees, right, they are people who are concerned with, they're not the scribes, that's a different group, but the Pharisees are the people who are concerned with living out Moses' instruction, with living out kind of all the law codes. And kind of, well, you have to do all these things in order to be right with God. So the Pharisees, they come to Jesus, and so here they begin to argue with Jesus. They begin to dispute with him. They seek a sign from heaven to test him. We'll talk about that in a second. And Jesus groans, sighs deeply in his spirit and says, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And upon leaving them, he embarks again and goes to the other side, the far side of the lake of the sea. He's getting his frequent sailor miles here, right? So let's take a look at this. Jesus goes, the Pharisees come, and they come to dispute with Jesus. But what are they disputing about? It doesn't exactly say, right? But the gist of it is like, hey, same thing they've said before, what sign do you give us to show that you have authority? Because Jesus has been doing all kinds of things. They've seen healings. They've seen this. They've heard reports of these feedings. But what sign do you have to prove that you are from heaven, that you are kind of the authoritative one? And so Jesus' response back to them is, and this is great because Jesus shows emotion, right? Jesus is not a robot. He's not somebody who is devoid of frustration and things here too, because Jesus is kind of that frustration there, that this underlying attitude that the Pharisees have, demanding this sign that Jesus is, this direct sign from God. Hey, they want the light shining down, almost like as if the heavens opened up or something, and a voice spoke from the heavens to say, hey, pay attention to this guy, listen to him. It'd be nice if there was a sign like that, wouldn't that be nice? So there's this underlying hard-heartedness that is not paying attention to signs that have been given. So, all right, so there's Jesus saying this thing. And why does this generation, why does the people who, the faithlessness here, why do they seek that sign? Truly, there have been the signs. And the sign, along with the open heart, should have been enough. Jesus is the Messiah, that he is the one that God has sent. Listen to him. So, all right, so Jesus leaves them, goes back over to the other side of the sea. And so, okay, now this is fun because there's a continuity here, right? So they had forgotten to bring bread. Who's the they here? The disciples. What is it with these guys and not supplying things up, right? So they had forgotten to bring bread before they set back out in the boat, and they had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat. So the disciples are probably talking about, this loaf of bread thing. And so then Jesus, it says here, cautions them. Another way of translating this is that he is giving the disciples explicit orders. He's like, all right, guys, listen up. Look out, watch out for the fermented dough, the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Okay, so Jesus talking about that. Let's get back to this in a second. And then the disciples begin discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Well, they did have bread. We already heard that, but okay. And Jesus, listening to them, says to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Do you not yet know? Do you not understand? Is your heart hardened? Is your heart in that hardened condition? Although you have eyes, do you not see? Although you have ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets of broken pieces did you take up? I said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 7. He says to them, do you not yet understand? Don't you get it? So let's dial it back. So Jesus is first talking and saying, watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. What's he talking about there? Because what is leaven? Yeast, right, is another way of saying it. Fermented dough. What does it do? It spreads, right? Kind of, and puffs up, right? Puffs up the bread. And when Jesus is saying that to the disciples, well, he's talking to them and saying, well, it's kind of this figurative description. Pharisees and Herod, 2 different groups, right? They would not normally associate those 2 things together. But as Jesus is talking to them, he is saying, look out for the attitude that they have, because who are they relying on? Who are the Pharisees relying on? Themselves. And who does Herod rely on? Himself. Don't rely on yourself. The disciples are talking about, we just have this one loaf of bread. A little bit ago, back when they were back on the side of the Sea of Galilee where they were before, the disciples were telling Jesus, well, we don't have enough bread to feed these people. We're not going to be able to do it. They did it before, too, with the feeding of the 5,000. So now Jesus, brings it back together. All right, so you're talking again about not having enough bread. Who is the one who's going to feed you? Who's the one that's going to make it happen? Well, he's pointing to God, but yeah, God is in the boat with them. Don't look to yourself for the confidence there. And again, he's pointing back to this thing. The numbers are important. Feeding of the 5,000, how many loaves? 12. Leftovers, baskets, right? The 12, again, a number of completeness. How many tribes in Israel? 12. How many disciples are there? 12. It's a complete number. Feeding of the 4,000, how many baskets of leftovers? 7. 7, number of completeness. How many days in a week? 7. It's, again, there's these patterns, is that who is providing completely? God. It's not on us, it's not on the disciples to have to rely on themselves there. So, and again, you kind of get the sense of Jesus, like, frustration. Like, how many years have I spent with you guys, and you're still not getting it? I would say, in the sense that it's not nothing. It's right. It's not that they don't have any bread. They say they don't have any bread because they've only got one loaf. There's probably preach a sermon on that one, right? But there is a loaf, right? What could Jesus do with that loaf? It could sink the boat, but there's enough. So, and that's the thing, is then even the crazy thing is, even if they didn't have any bread, could Jesus have fed them? Yes. The Word that created everything out of nothing, he can take care of these 12 hungry guys in the boat. Okay, so let's keep on going. So now they're heading across the sea. They're in Bethsaida. Some people. So this. Now, keep in mind. Yeah, Warren. Jesus can use the two things in a different way. It's like the Spirit, like the leaven, can spread in a good way. The leaven, though, in the effects of the leaven, that being puffed up is a bad thing. He's kind of using it as something they can understand. And it's not that leaven is bad. It's not that leaven is evil. But he's saying, beware the effects. He's teaching them in a parable. Does that help? It's not that the leaven is bad. You can have yeasty loaves of bread. I love yeast, dinner rolls. Don't cut those. You don't have to have pita. I mean, pita's good too. But it's not that thing, but it's kind of what it's pointing to. All right, so now Bethsaida. So Jesus has just he's been direct with the disciples about their failure to what? Failure to understand. What words does he use there? Look at verse 18. Verse 18. Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? What did Jesus just do a little bit ago? We were just reading Mark's gospel. Healed a man who was deaf. What's he about to do? Let's read out and find. Okay, let's see. So Mark 8:22, they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. What did people do with the deaf man they brought to Jesus? Begged him to heal him. All right, so now this blind man, they begged him to touch him, and Jesus, what does he do here? He takes the blind man by the hand, he takes him out of the village, takes him away kind of by himself. Here, he spits onto his eyes and lays hands on him and asks him, do you see anything? He's blind. What's he going to see? Oh, wait. He looks up, the blind man looks up, and he says to Jesus, I see people, but I see people who look like they're walking around, like trees walking around. Then Jesus lays his hands on his eyes again, and he opens his eyes, and his sight was restored. His eyes are open, he can see clearly. And Jesus sent him to his home saying, do not even enter the village. So Jesus, there's a thing here too. So there's this healing Jesus does, similar with the deaf man. What's similar there? Well, he takes him away, takes him away from everybody else first, and then has that one-on-one time with him, talking with him. He does the spitting, this time not necessarily spitting on the ground or spitting in the hands. I looked, I didn't see the spitting on the hands thing, but spitting, because that's like healing salve. Think of it like moms spit on their kids to like heal everything, right? Clean their face. It's like, but there was that thinking though, like the saliva being a thing that can help out to kind of clean. But here spits onto his eyes, and then lays his hands on him, and this two-stage kind of thing, right? So after the first thing, what's the guy's condition? So he's not blind, but he can't see clearly. And he's probably heard, he can kind of understand that there's these things out there. He knows trees. He's probably felt trees, right? But these tall things is kind of this blurry picture. So Jesus goes again. Is it because Jesus couldn't heal him completely the first time? No. But then he lays hands on him this second time, and then he can see. And not just see, but imagine now, like, better than 20/20, right? Everything comes into focus. So how does this connect, just think about it, with the conversation Jesus was just having with the disciples in the boat before they got over here? It's got it. So they can kind of see, like the disciples, let's give them credit. They kind of see what's going on. And we've had the confessions, right? That we're about to have this right here, who Jesus is. But they don't quite get, it hasn't snapped into focus, right? So with this, we kind of get this image here as Jesus is doing this healing in two things. Well, the disciples, they're soon going to understand that Jesus is the Messiah, right? But not what the Messiah, what that means, what it means to have him be the Messiah. Okay. All right. So Jesus, again, with the command to not tell, it's kind of we see throughout Mark's gospel, this kind of the command to secrecy in many ways, kind of having the people hold off on what they're saying. Because Jesus was just over here on this side of the sea. And what big thing happened when he was over there last time? Feeding of the 4,000. And when the people see this, they get their vision blurry. They think of Jesus as something other than what he has come to be. So now, okay, so let's go back to Peter. Again, what role does Peter play in Mark's gospel? You guys remember that one? So Peter's the one who's telling Mark these. So Peter's probably like the primary witness, primary source, telling these things to Mark. All right, so Jesus goes on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi in this kind of foreign territory here. This is north of the Sea of Galilee. This is kind of really outside of Jewish territory. This is I think if this is not definitively it, I think this is one of the farthest places Jesus gets outside of kind of the home base territory here, like in Gentile territory. And it's a center for pagan worship. So Jesus is out there with the disciples. And on the way, he asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? So what do they say? Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say one of the prophets. When we had the whole interlude about John the Baptist being executed, what were people saying about who Jesus was? John the Baptist come back from the dead? That's what Herod's wondering, because Herod killed him. Herod killed John the Baptist, right? Well, maybe he's Elijah, the prophet who was to come back to kind of before God brought the end to come, or a prophet. So same thing being said here. So Jesus asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter answers, Peter, God bless Peter, right? He's never slow to answer. But he's Peter answering on behalf of the other disciples, because Jesus doesn't say, Peter, who do you say that I am? He's like, who do all y'all say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. You are HaChristos. You are the Messiah. It's Messiah, right? Is the Hebrew word, same word. The anointed one. You are God's anointed one. And then Jesus, again with Mark, we see this again and again, that command, he strictly charges them to tell no one about him. But why? His time hadn't come. And who do people think the Messiah, or what do they think the Messiah is supposed to do? Be an earthly king, be a political deliverer. And going back, if you're going back into the home territories, they're having this conversation outside of the territories. When they get back, if you're going to talk about, well, Jesus is the Messiah, I'm just like, oh yeah, he's going to save us. He's going to free us from Rome. He's going to make sure that the Jewish people are back in charge. It's like it's a misunderstanding of what God has given his Messiah to be. Okay. So what's that? Judas is with the group too, yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is like Judas might have been, and this might be leading into things, and this is speculation on our part, that Jesus is failing to be the Messiah we need him to be, from Judas' perspective. Speculation. But let's keep, so Jesus tells them, tell no one about him, and Jesus begins to teach the disciples, that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, all these groups, all the religious authority, the leaders of the people, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. He's not speaking in parables. He's telling them, here's how it's going to be. But Peter, again, God bless Peter, because what did Peter just do? You're the Christ. Right? Peter takes Jesus aside. Jesus, come here. You know what you're talking about. You're the Christ, but you don't know what you're talking about. Let me tell you what the Messiah is supposed to be. So Jesus sees what Peter's doing, sees his disciples, because they probably heard what Peter is saying there too. He rebukes Peter, says, "Get behind me, Satan. For you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." So when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness by Satan, the devil was trying to get Jesus to what? Well, to take shortcuts. Don't be this kind of Messiah. Be this kind of Messiah. What's Peter trying to do? It's the same thing, right? Get behind me, Satan. So that's not the things of God. That's the things of man. That's how humankind thinks things should work.
So we had earlier,
Yeah.
you said, do you still not understand? He said to them with bread. So now he's like, okay, if they don't understand, I'm going to just lay it out.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And think about, there's a reason we have this healing of the blind man with the kind of the 2-stage thing too. It's like they see, but they don't see. And so Jesus, now get this. So he calls the crowd to him with his disciples. So there's the crowd's back again here. And he says, if anybody would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And he said to them, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. Okay, so we're going to do it, I think. We're going to finish chapter 8. So Jesus then, not just with his disciples, but with the crowd at large, he's changing the way people are kind of, he's challenging the people's expectations. And not just then, because I think this is the case today too, because people say, well, if we're going to follow Jesus, if he's going to be the Messiah we want him to be, what's going to happen? We're going to have freedom. We're going to have liberation. We're going to have what we need in the world, because Jesus, he heals broken people. He drives out sickness. He provides food and provision, even more than just what we need. We have our fill, right? But what does Jesus say? Whoever would come after me, whoever would follow me, whoever would be my disciple, let him deny himself and take up what? So for a moment, kind of let's separate ourselves from this take up your cross thing and maybe like a modern Christian understanding of it here. Jesus is talking to people there. When they hear him say, take up your cross, what are they hearing him say? Suffering and torture, death. This is an execution, right?
Was he giving them a clue? Because when he said to them earlier, he just said that I must be killed. He didn't say how. And then here he's saying they have to take up the cross. Is this like
If they're following Jesus and they're carrying a cross, he's leading the way. They don't know that yet, right? But they understand that the cross, that is like the worst form of execution that the Romans could do. Is this public, because it wasn't just as horrible as the physical component of it was. A big component of crucifixion was shame, because this is an honor and shame based society. We're kind of distant from that, and there's downsides on that side. But it's honor and shame, and when you're put up on the cross, you're hung naked for all the world to see your shame, laid bare, and you're left there too. The reason they took the people down from the cross when Jesus was crucified, the reason that they broke the other two thieves' legs, is because it was a big Sabbath coming up. And the Jewish leaders like, we're not going to have this shame out there. We're having this big celebration. So take up your cross. That's follow me to death. You're giving up your life. So it's not about all these other things, about the freedom and liberation and being filled. And that's not what following of Jesus is about. It's about giving up self. So when Jesus is saying, if you're going to save your life in this world, you're losing it in eternity. But if you give up my life, if you give up your life, if you are not trying to cling to that, but losing it for Jesus' sake, for the sake of the gospel, this good news of God's kingdom breaking in, you actually get it. You get real life, full life into eternity. Because it's not like the Pharisees. It's not like Herod that you're going to be able to depend on yourself to be able to get what you need. It's ultimately going to be coming from God. And this thing, don't forget those last lines there in 38. Whoever's ashamed of me and my words, because the cross is an instrument of shame. Whoever's ashamed of me and of my words, if you run from Jesus. Who ran from Jesus when he was taken to be crucified? Everybody, right? Including Peter. And so as we're looking ahead, we can kind of get a sense of what Peter's going to be feeling here. The Son of Man will be ashamed of when he comes in glory, the glory of his Father with the holy angels. But so this is Mark 9:1. We kind of already even got into 9:1, but it'll go with, we'll have Pastor Richard pick up there next week. I'll give you a little preview here, right? Do some of those in the crowd standing there with him get to see the kingdom of God breaking in before they taste death? Come back next week and find out. So there we go. Any questions on that? Good job. We got through a chapter plus today. Do not expect similar success in the future. Yes. Ooh. Yeah.
That's not being possible.
Yeah.
So I'm on the cheater side going to accept you as Christ. Either way, whether we accept him or not, he's going, I'm God. I'm not a human. It's kind of a hard thing to hear.
And it is, and it was well said. But it's the Spirit, right, that has to be the one that's bringing things into focus, that is convicting, that it's not our way, that no, this is actually, there's something different other than our preference. So the Spirit at work in that. All right. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, thanks. Well, chapter 9 next week.